Wyatt ruling mandated improved safety, reasonable doctor-patient ratios, and individualized treatment. However, Partlow's legacy of abuse and neglect continued for decades. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, did annual inspections of Partlow. As shown in this 2009 report by the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, or ADAP, inspections by CMS found that Partlow repeatedly put clients' health and wellness in jeopardy. In fact, in the 10 months prior to the 2008 CMS survey, 541 falls were recorded at Partlow, with 268 resulting in injuries. With 200 patients living at Partlow, that's more than 2.5 falling incidences per resident and more than 1 fall with injury per person. Among the cases noted by CMS was that of Johnnie Mack Whitten, a resident of Partlow for nearly 30 years.
Johnnie was born on February the 8th of 1949. I'm the oldest child in the family, and I was 9 when he was born. He was always my little baby to hold and carry on my hip. He looked to me for a lot of things, you know. I would hear my parents say that he was not learning things as fast as we had. That was the beginning of problems.
Johnnie Mack was born severely mentally handicapped. He grew up in special education programs, but at 18 was no longer eligible to continue. Unable to adapt to the adult workshop programs offered in the community, the family's attempts to help Johnnie Mack assimilate in society were proving unsuccessful. At 19, he was admitted to Partlow.
And he was there for a brief while. He was supposed to stay on the admission ward for a month. My parents were not to visit during that time. And so at the end of the month, they went to visit him, and they found him with severe cellulitis in his face and cheek and a fractured jawbone. It was split in 2 places, and his teeth were impacted in that injury. He told us that he was hogtied, and we never heard that term from Johnnie.
Johnnie Mack was brought home. However, as his family struggled to care for him, Whitten was brought back to Partlow in the early 1980s, 12 years after first being admitted.
When we went out there to visit Johnnie, which I usually did with my mom when I went home, where they had us in the visitor's room and everything, it looked okay. You didn't really have a clear picture of what was going on everywhere. But we started getting reports, and he started getting injuries that were, occurring more and more. Now, when he was injured bad enough that they had him in the hospital, we always went to see him then. I come from Florida and go to see him.
As Johnnie Mack's injuries continued, the family began to insist on changes in his care.
I said you could get him in a safer environment if that's what's causing these injuries, or you could put a 1-to-1 special on it. And he said, Ms. Rowan, we will put a 1-to-1 special on Johnnie around the clock from now on.
Because of Johnnie Mack's significant mental disabilities and the fact that he was legally blind, a 1-to-1 special was implemented that called for someone to be within arm's reach of him at all times. Despite the revision in the care plan, Whitten's injuries continued and even escalated. At 6 a.m. on the morning of January 2nd, 2008, night shift caretaker Ngozi Iheto was sitting outside of Johnnie Mack Whitten's room as he awoke. Shortly after 6, morning caretaker Cynthia Somerville arrived for her shift. Iheto told Somerville that Johnnie Mack was now awake. However, Somerville continued talking with other staff members at the nurses' station and did not report to Whitten's room. Despite the fact that Whitten was awake and that his care plan called for one-to-one care, Iheto left the room and reportedly took out the trash and linens, leaving Johnnie Mack alone. Approximately 15 minutes later, Cynthia Somerville went to check on Whitten and found him lying motionless on the floor.
I got a telephone call from the staff there that was on the unit with Johnnie, and they told me that he had been injured. He had some lacerations on his head, and she said several. I think she said 5. I said, how did he get hurt? She said, we don't know. I said, well, he's supposed to have a one-to-one special. And she said, no, he didn't have a one-to-one special. She said, maybe the one-to-one special will be on at 6:30.
Johnnie Mack was rushed to DCH Hospital.
Neurologist talked to me and the neurosurgeon talked to me. And they told me that Johnnie had had a severe head injury. He had massive bleeding. And I thought, well, Johnnie has had 20-something years of this. I told him just keep him calm. I packed up, got in touch with my family and tried to get to Tuscaloosa, but by the time I got to Montgomery, I had a call that he had passed away.
In spite of her repeated attempts to get information about Johnnie Mack's last moments from the Department of Mental Health and Partlow, Bernice was still without answers, despite the fact that, as shown on this document, Bernice requested to be notified of all incidents reported for Johnnie Mack.
And I couldn't understand why they couldn't tell us how he got hurt. They never could explain his injuries. They told me that they had finally, after months passed, they had finally gotten the autopsy report. And I was expecting a whole report of an autopsy, but it was the front sheet saying that he died of a head injury. You know, that's where I picked up that he had the fractured skull, because they hadn't told me that.
In reports from the Department of Mental Health, there are multiple incidents cited year after year for Johnnie Mack Whitten. Despite their knowledge of Whitten's consistent pattern of injuries leading up to his death, the Department of Mental Health suggested only minor changes in Whitten's care and failed to adequately oversee the implementation of even those changes. As a result, Johnnie Mack suffered over 200 injuries at Partlow prior to his death. It appears that the Department of Mental Health's oversight of Partlow was limited at many levels.
they should have had better trained nursing staff and medical staff.
Records showed Partlow staff who were assigned to remain with residents at all times did not do so, and even falsified records. Ngozi Ihetu resigned on January 4, 2008, 2 days after Whitten's death. Despite being reprimanded for falsifying documents, Cynthia Somerville remained at Partlow as a sitter. Following Whitten's death, CMS did a facility investigation that found that Whitten had been the victim of neglect and that the staff responsible for Whitten's care had falsified documents in an effort to disguise the fact that he had been left alone in violation of his specialized care plan. A violation that was the sole cause of Johnnie Mack Whitten's death.
And I was sad, but I was relieved that he was out of his situation, that he wasn't going to be hurt anymore.